Doctors of Reddit, what is your best? Is there a doctor here? Story. Story 1. At a college Halloween party, some kid passed out from what I heard was a combination of a bunch of Xanax and liquor. Everyone at the party found the guy dressed as a doctor. He had a stethoscope and asked him to check if the kid was breathing. Story 2. My boss a number of years ago when I was a postdoc. He was a prostate cancer surgeon and a damn good one. We were on a flight to a prostate cancer conference when someone on the plane had a heart attack. They did the whole, "Is there a doctor on the plane?" thing, and he stepped forward. I saw the look on his face. Because seriously, what are you supposed to do at 30,000 feet with no equipment, especially when your specialty is a completely different part of the body? He checked the guy, confirmed it was a heart attack, had him take his heart medication, and told the crew to land the plane. The guy survived. But really, calling for a doctor in a lot of those situations isn't much help beyond basic care and diagnosis. It's not like they carry Stimpaks around under normal circumstances. Story 3. I'm not the doctor my wife is. We weren't married at the time. This was during the first few months of our relationship. I work in the entertainment industry, and we were at a pre-release screening of 127 Hours, aka the James Franco saws off his own hand movie. I wasn't super excited about seeing it, but I was hosting a Q&A with the director afterward and was looking forward to impressing my date with how cool I was for getting to do an onstage interview. Turns out, the movie was actually pretty good. And the infamous scene where Franco starts hacking off his own arm was extremely intense, maybe too intense. As that part of the film unfolded, you could hear gasps throughout the theater. Suddenly, across the aisle from us, someone yelled, "We need a doctor." A guy had pretty much collapsed in his seat and seemed like he couldn't breathe. My girlfriend leapt into action like a total pro, even though she'd only graduated from med school about 6 months earlier. She was immediately by the guy's side, propping him up in the aisle, checking his vitals. Meanwhile, Franco was about 70% of the way through his wrist, more gasps and screams, and the sound design was just brutal. Suddenly, someone else came rushing down the aisle. Could she check on another person who had collapsed on the opposite side of the theater? At least one more person had lost it. So for the final sequence of the movie, she was basically running a one-woman triage unit in the lobby until the paramedics arrived. I wanted to run out and be with her and bask in her awesomeness, but I didn't want to miss the last part of the film in case the director referenced it during the Q&A. In the end, it wasn't anything serious, mostly panic and anxiety attacks. But there's no doubt in my mind that the whole screening might have descended into chaos if she hadn't been there. As it turned out, the director was 20 minutes late to the Q&A, so it became my turn to save the day by jumping on stage and entertaining the audience extemporaneously for what felt like forever. Honestly, I was kind of lucky all that craziness happened. It gave me a solid chunk of time to get reactions from the crowd and play off it with a, "Well, that was pretty fucking crazy, right?" kind of bit. And when the director finally showed up, I had a killer opening question. Looking back, it was an awesome night. My girl and I were both totally in our element, in completely different ways. We'll have been married 4 years as of tomorrow. Story 4. I'm not a doctor, but I witnessed one of those moments. I was at this local dive bar, truly the devious dive bar ever. It's basically a punk bar. They don't serve liquor, but you can bring your own bottle. They've got maybe 2 beers on tap, and the rest are in a cooler. There are PBR cans hanging from the ceiling. All the decor is this bizarre, homemade stuff. The walls are covered in graffiti, it's smoky as hell, and they let you smoke weed out on the back patio. It's honestly the last place you'd expect to see a doctor, or anyone remotely connected to the medical field. I was walking back inside from the patio when this girl suddenly grabbed my arm and started squeezing really hard. At first, I told her to let go and started getting annoyed, until I looked at her face. Her eyes were wide, and she was completely frozen. That's when I realized she was having a seizure. I grabbed her around the waist, sat down, and held on to her while yelling out that she was having a seizure. A guy came running over, saying she was his girlfriend, and then another guy rushed up and said he was a doctor. He asked if she had taken anything or if she was diabetic. The boyfriend said she had epilepsy. Her seizure ended after about a minute, and she was okay, just really embarrassed. The doctor stayed with her for a bit, checked her out, helped her get to her car, and then came back inside to finish his beer. Story 5. I've shared this one before, I think, but it happened on an American Airlines flight from Pittsburgh to London, somewhere over Greenland. A flight attendant got on the PA and asked if there were any doctors on board. When she asked a second time, I finally hit my call button. A passenger was having chest pains. After a brief examination, I determined it was less likely cardiac-related and more likely hepatitis. He had obvious jaundice. I told the flight attendant that the passenger needed to lie down and that I needed to monitor his condition for any changes, but I didn't think an emergency landing was necessary. The only seats that reclined far enough were in first class, so I got an upgrade. We landed at Heathrow without incident, and paramedics were waiting at the gate. When I got home from my trip, I had a letter waiting for me from the chief medical officer at American Airlines, thanking me and awarding me 50,000 frequent flyer miles, which was enough for a domestic flight. Story 6. Can we count being mistaken for a doctor? I was a paramedic student at the time, completing my clinical hours on an Army base with a provider I had served with overseas. Even though I was still in the Army, he called me by my first name and insisted I shadow him whenever possible. This was only occasionally. Fast forward a couple of months into this routine, and I'm at the base grocery store. Suddenly, a woman bursts in, borderline panicking, yelling for an ambulance and a doctor. So I bebop outside and mosey over to the commotion, where there's a woman, probably in her 70s, sitting on the ground by her car, being attended to by another woman. I ask what's going on and run through the standard head injury questions. The woman helping her says she suddenly started acting confused, fell, and hit her head on the way down, but caught herself. She says the woman seems fine now, alert and oriented, and wants to drive herself home. Channeling all of the medical authority I absolutely did not have. I say, hell no. She needs to go to the hospital. By ambulance. The woman agrees. It's at this point I recognize the person helping her, a nurse from the base hospital. The same nurse I'd had a crush on for a while. Every time I was at the hospital, I hoped I'd get to work with her, but I never did. So I awkwardly say something like, "Hey, you're a nurse. You don't need me getting in the way." She asks me to stick around just in case. When the ambulance arrives, I'm still kind of hovering in the background, hoping to maybe talk to her afterward, maybe even ask her to grab a beer. As she hands off the retiree's wife to the paramedics, she says she's going to the hospital, and Dr. Jeff agrees and points to me. That's when I realize I am Dr. Jeff. I freeze. I have absolutely no idea what to do, so I end up locked in a silent staring contest with the EMS guy, while telepathically screaming that there is, in fact, a massive amount of metaphorical shit in my pants. Thankfully, they just loaded the patient up and drove off. No consultation needed from the idiot non-doctor. I turned and power-walked back into the store to grab my deodorant and ramen noodles. No beer. No love story. Definitely no doctor. A few days later, I called the provider I'd been shadowing and told him the story. He laughed and said he'd already heard about the lazy and arrogant Dr. Jeff. He was just happy to finally know who she was talking about. Story 7. I think I've told this story before, but here we go. I was a third-year medical student on a flight with my dad from Sydney to Singapore. Could any doctors on board please make themselves known to the cabin crew? The responders were me, a medical student, my dad, a medical oncologist, he treats cancer, and an orthopedic surgeon, fixes broken bones. The patient was a late middle-aged man in business class, first class. It was upstairs, who was diabetic. He had taken his insulin before the meal, then decided he didn't like the food and didn't eat. He went into hypoglycemia. When we got to him, he was pretty drowsy. We tried talking to him, tried to get him to drink some juice, but had no luck. The guy eventually passed out completely and became unresponsive. So the three of us pulled him out of his seat and onto the aisle floor. We asked the crew to bring us all their medical supplies. They actually had a decent amount, 4 bags and equipment, cannulas, oxygen, emergency medications, and more. On this particular plane, all the smaller items were stored in plastic lunchboxes, each labeled on the lid. But inside, nothing was sorted. We knew we had to get some fluids and sugar into this guy, or he might die. We'd used his own glucometer and confirmed his blood sugar was dangerously low. First step, get 4 access. Once we had that, treatment would be straightforward. We found the box labeled for cannulas, dumped it on the floor, and started sorting through it. There were plenty of cannulas, but no tourniquet. In hindsight, we might have lost it under a seat, but who knows? We improvised, rubber gloves tied around his arm, manual pressure, anything to help someone get the cannula in. But remember who was working on this guy? Me, a student who had only practiced cannulation on mannequins and 2 senior doctors who hadn't placed a cannula in 20+ years. And to make it worse, this was a night flight, so we were working in the dark for a while until we insisted the lights be turned on. Between us, we probably tried 20 times to get a line in. We were panicking. Cannulas were all over the aisle floor, rolling under seats. We just couldn't get a vein, so we started looking for alternatives. I found a vial of glucagon, basically anti-insulin, and handed it to my dad. He grabbed the syringe from the kit, jabbed it into the guy's leg, and pushed the plunger. "Dad, I hadn't drawn up the drug yet." "What was in the syringe?" "Air." "So that was great." We kept rummaging. We even found an intraosseous needle, an enormous thing meant to stab through the shin bone into the marrow, and seriously considered using it. But eventually, we grabbed one of the relatively clean, previously used cannulas and kept trying. The guy had now been unresponsive for what felt like 30 minutes. We were panicking on the floor, completely overwhelmed. Finally, we got access. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. We hooked up in 4, manually pumped in fluid and dextrose as fast as we could, and he started to come around. We wrote up a detailed set of notes for the crew, along with suggestions to improve the onboard medical supplies so future emergencies wouldn't feel so chaotic. We landed in Singapore a few hours later. The patient was the first one off the plane and was taken to the hospital for proper care. As far as I know, he was fine. Oh, and it turns out the patient was a general practitioner. Probably the most qualified person among all of us to deal with the situation. Story 8. I've been the "Is there a doctor on the plane?" person twice. The first time was on a flight from LAX to JFK. It was pretty straightforward. A woman had a cramp in her leg and was worried it might be a blood clot, but it seemed mostly like anxiety. For the record, even if it was a clot, you'd generally be okay for a couple of hours. The second time was a little more nerve-wracking. A man passed out. He was sweaty and pale. He eventually woke up, vomited, and then said he felt okay, just tired. The onboard stethoscope was basically useless, cheap quality, and you can't hear anything over the engine noise anyway. But he had a strong radial pulse, which meant his systolic blood pressure was at least 90, and he was breathing fine with no chest pain. He didn't have any obvious cardiac risk factors. There's really not much you can do in that situation. The only real decision is, do you ground the plane or not? My gut said he was okay, and I was about 95% confident there wasn't anything seriously wrong. We were about 45 minutes from our destination, so when the flight attendant asked what to do, I asked how quickly we could get there. She said they could speed it up. The pilot got us in within 20 minutes and went straight to the gate. Honestly, it was kind of cool. We'd been running behind, but we ended up arriving on time, even with getting him off the plane first. I stayed with him for a bit afterward, and thankfully, he was okay. He and his wife ended up going on to have a great vacation. It was also really nice that the whole plane load of people seemed happy with me, probably because we landed early. I've had friends who had to make a plane land for someone with chest pain, who later turned out to have a massive MI, and still had to deal with a plane full of angry passengers. Story 9. Not a doctor, but I've got a story from the last time I went to Red Robin, and the last time I ever visited Kentucky. I was on a service trip with my college group, and we stopped for lunch on the way to Virginia to grab some burgers. Within 5 minutes of placing our order, one of the guys in our group had a grand mal seizure and ended up crashing into the table of a nearby family, 2 kids and their mom. The kids freaked out. Most of our group froze in a collective WTF moment, and the bartender immediately called 911. Our waitress disappeared almost as quickly as she had reappeared moments earlier. Luckily, the mom mentioned she had relatives with seizure disorders and jumped in to help, rolling the guy onto his side in the booth. I quickly got the chairs out of the way on that side to give him some room. Honestly, having a doctor there probably would have helped a lot. The ambulance eventually arrived, and we ended up stuck in Kentucky for half the day. That's how I learned that bartenders in Kentucky apparently deal with all kinds of situations, that waitresses often have zero training on how to handle seizures, and that we got our meals for free. I haven't set foot in a Red Robin since. Story 10. Okay, not a doctor, but I was trained in advanced casualty care during my time in the Navy. A bunch of us were at a bar, having some drinks and tossing cash into a communal jar. At some point, one of the locals tried to help himself to the money. Big mistake. One of the guys saw him and decided to handle it in a very direct and, let's say, forceful manner, with a right cross to the jaw. The would-be thief flew backward at high speed, and the back of his head slammed into the corner of the bar on the way down. He bounced off my shoulder and landed right at my feet. I bent down to check him out, and the back of his head was not a pretty sight. I grabbed a bar towel and gently pressed it against the wound to help stem the bleeding and support any possible underlying injuries. The guy was completely unconscious. I asked someone where the nearest taxi rank was, and we carried him out. I got into the cab with him, and a woman, his girlfriend, as it turned out, got into the front seat. We went straight to the hospital, and he was admitted with serious head injuries. His girlfriend was very impressed with how calm and capable I was in taking care of him. So impressed, in fact, that she invited me back to her place later. And let's just say she took care of me with an equally generous amount of care and skill. In the words of Eek the cat, it never hurts to help. Story 11. I was flying to Miami some time ago, and it was my first time ever on a plane. My parents had given me Star of Life luggage tags after I graduated from paramedic school, so my carry-on had one of those tags on it. About 30 minutes after takeoff, I was just about to take my first sip of bourbon when I noticed a flight attendant sprinting from the front of the plane toward the back. I looked over, but the curtain separating first class was closed. She came back a few minutes later and calmly sat down, so I figured it was nothing. 2 minutes later, she did it again. This time I was watching more intently, but once again she returned just as quickly and sat down. I lifted my bourbon to finally take that first sip when she came over and asked, Are you a doctor?" "No, I'm a paramedic. Is something wrong?" "Yeah, there's a guy unconscious in the back. Can you check on him?" Long story short, a passenger on the plane was having a massive stroke. American Airlines actually has excellent medical kits. They're basically a cardiac monitor short of being a fully stocked ambulance, complete with medications. I got on the phone with an ER doctor in Raleigh-Durham, and by the time we landed, Miami-Dade Fire, EMS was waiting on the tarmac. The patient survived. The flight crew gave me a bunch of minibar bottles, some other swag, and 30,000 frequent flyer miles. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, activate the notification bell, and share a similar story or anything you'd like to say in the comments. See you next time.